Hello, Dave. It's Velikovsky here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for
Right,
putting on
thanks.
this conference. I apologize. I just tuned in recently. I just received the email that the seminar was in progress. It's currently 2:32 a.m. in Newcastle, Australia. So forgive me if I sound a little sleepy. I'm a huge fan of the work of Tyler Volk and Jared Yeagers. I missed most of the current talk. I do apologize, but I absolutely salute all the work of all big historians since the work of David Christian, starting perhaps 3 decades ago in the 1980s, was it? When David Christian began lecturing at Macquarie University after moving from Russian history, as I understand it, through to widening the scope to big history and the amazing achievement of integrating the sciences and the humanities, where humanities being the study of history and literature and philosophy. But David Christian did an amazing achievement, just in my humble opinion, in integrating those two separated worldviews. If we go back to C.P. Snow and the two cultures, um, to bring those two very distant, sort of separately evolved branches of intellectual investigation back together is an amazing achievement. I think it is a really amazing moment in history that we're currently living through with the advances in AI just at the moment, with developments in advances in AI scientific research tools such as Cosmos with a K, KOSMOS. It might be worth a Google. There is a project and an application called Cosmos, a tool for scientific discovery by Edison Scientific Labs, which I think supports the work of David Christian and David Spire and everyone else working on the Big History Project, reintegrating the expansion of knowledge back to what E.O. Wilson in 1998 called the consilience of all knowledge, the sciences, the social sciences, and the arts and humanities. I think all 8 billion people will benefit from reintegrating those three great branches of knowledge. And I think David Christian deserves great props and great appreciation for correcting the course, if you like. Now, I'm going to make a little controversial statement, if that's okay. I believe personally that in the 1970s, 1980s, academia perhaps drifted a little off course in adopting the postmodernist worldview with scholars such as Michel Foucault and Roland Barthes, drifting away from an attention to what is truth, which I believe personally is the core mission of science, is attending to what is true. And while the postmodernists certainly came up with some interesting ideas, I believe the Consilience Project, started by, or restarted, rebooted, shall we say, by the likes of David Christian, um, has course corrected the intellectual direction of humanity. Now, I know that is a
Sorry?
big statement, that's a big
Yeah,
call,
definitely lower.
but I personally salute the efforts
Yeah,
of anyone
that
who
may
works in
be a
big
different.
history and reintegrating those three.
I'm sorry. I tried to mute somebody, and just at that time, JT, yours is the one that came up. Could you unmute yourself? Very good. Sorry about that.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
Thanks, Dave. Did anyone hear any of that?
it was like the last minute, I think.
Okay, in a nutshell, what I was getting at is I salute the work of David Christian starting in the 80s, um, integrating big history back into scientific knowledge. And I salute the work of all big history scholars looking at the 8 stages um, in big history and looking to the future. And I highly recommend an application called Cosmos with a K, KOSMOS, by Edison Scientific Labs. Um, it's an AI that speeds up scientific research. So I'm very appreciative of Edward O. Wilson's work with consilience in 1998. And I believe David Christian's work and everyone, Fred Spire and everyone in big history intersects with that work in terms of reuniting the three great branches of learning: science, the social sciences, and the arts humanities. Um, I myself am a bit critical of the postmodernist movement that kicked off in the 80s in academia and drifted off and away from science, whereas I really appreciate how big history brings back science into the humanities. So I salute the work of all big historians. So thank you for running this conference, Dave, and everyone who's presenting.
Very nice. Thank you very much. So is it JT that
JT is great. I
okay.
also like Velikovsky of Newcastle because it reminds me of Leonardo of Vinci and Plato of Athens.
All right, very good.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much. Anybody else who's not giving a presentation want to say something? I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, and that's okay if you don't want to share uh, anything at this time. That's okay.
This is Keith Henson. I put a note as to who I am in the chat, and I published in Big History a few months ago, which somebody
Uh,
might enjoy on
well,
the genetic selection of war. There's a fascinating article in Science currently about the disappearance of an entire culture, over 700,000 square miles of culture that just vanished with apparently an orgy of killing each other at the end of it, and it's a utterly fascinating article if you haven't read it.
May I ask what time period and what location was this civilization?
Uh, the the BJK, it was like 5,000, right around. They ended it at around 5,000 BC, and it ended apparently in an orgy of killing each other. It's bizarre, but especially over such a huge area with such a little amount of communications at that time. But nonetheless, they seem to have done it, and there's it's a major article in Science Policy. Actually, I have it here at issue. The it's called a headless mystery. It's about finding a whole bunch of headless people, and the date on it is 25 November. But anyway, it's a fascinating article. If you haven't read it, you really want to, and it leaves you with what happens here. Uh, on the other hand, humans are known to do stuff as weird as that. You think the famous what was it called? The one where 20 some odd people died, the Heaven's Gate people, and then the absolutely 900 some odd people died in that crazy business of Jim Jones down in Guyana. And you just wonder about that. On the other hand, finding out what happened to these people, which may be, unfortunately, may be impossible, may be a very good idea because who knows, humans may still be susceptible to whatever it was that killed an entire culture over 700,000 square miles of Europe. So
I just looked it up, and it's apparently the farmer culture of Europe was the one that was attacked. I don't know if that coincides with the time of the horse people that came in, because there's hunter gatherers and a farmer culture in Europe, and then I know the horse people, horse riders came in. Maybe
horse,
I'm not sure.
Horse people were at least 1,000 years later.
Okay.
So, but this is just left. These people did not. They were 2,000 years ahead of the sword development of the sword. So, and apparently they lived pretty peacefully over this huge area, and then just abruptly there was this complete orgy of killing where they all died off. So it's very, very weird.
Yes, I think there, others in big history are writing on war and the development of humans in that area. Stephen,
Yeah, that's the topic of my talk in a couple hours, or about an hour or so.
also Daniel Barrios has written quite a bit on, from chimpanzees and bonobos to humans, and the conflict there. So that's a good, important part of big history, and it's good that we're looking at various aspects of it. Thank you very much.
Charles Shuttle, who was a famous science fiction author, postulated a group of aliens that could not live more than 20,000 of them on any planet, because if they got to that size level, something crazy went wrong with the whole bunch, and they committed suicide. So, there's people have thought about this before.
Yes, very good. Andre, you have a
Yes. Hi. Just in response to the weird tragedy of an entire civilization killing each other off, we just came out of the 20th century where about a minimum of 200 million people were slaughtered between the wars and the starvation policies of Stalin and Mao, which were deliberate starvation policies. I think a small estimate is 200 million. So as big history is perhaps not a progressive history, perhaps we have these cycles, and perhaps we are not so far removed from our primate ancestors.
excellent, very good. Ken?
Yeah, I guess I'm just echoing what Andre just finished with, is that in our neuropsychologically, our emotional centers override reason all the time. Plato got it wrong when he talked about the metaphor of the three horsemen with the passions. I forget the second horse, and reason guides the others, but it's more often as Freud got a lot wrong, but he did get right that the passions or our more primitive brain centers override our more advanced centers. And we've seen that obviously in our own country right now, a demagogue Sorry about your political persuasions, but from my analysis, the demagogue has, um, taken over reason. And so we're giving that a try right now in this country. And until we can get out too from following charismatic leaders, enough of us do, not everybody obviously, but that's a evolutionary problem. And of course, our culture is advancing faster than our biology. So yeah, I got some big problems. No matter we come up with rationally, the emotions say get out of the way. I think it was the Vienna School that wondered why in hell World War I happened when we were in the Age of Enlightenment, and they realized eventually that it was propaganda overwhelmed any type of reason. There's just too many people that reason is the driving force of their decision making, and so forth. And you can twist myths, as we know, in any direction you want. Buddha and Jesus would be abhorrent at what's being done in their name, etc.
Very, very good. Thanks, Ken. Ken Baskin.
In a very real way, I think we're talking about this right now. What we're talking about is a paradigm shift that's happening all over the world. I believe that everyone knows that the ways that we grew up with in the 60s don't work anymore. No one knows what will work. And people aren't real good at facing their fears, so they end up acting them out. And I think that's what we've been talking about in the last 15 minutes. That when people are terrified and don't know what's happening. Interesting sideline. I remember reading something in Joseph Campbell that whenever the worldview falls apart, drug use spikes. I read that in the early 70s, and it's just taken off since then. So I think that what we're trying to do is help craft a new paradigm, a new worldview. And I have no illusion about living to see it happen, but I think it's very exciting to be part of the process.
Thanks, Ken. Andre?
Yes. I just wanted to respond to Ken Solis's previous point. It's not just that we have unreason that's overwhelming reason, but as those two brilliant essayists, Horkheimer and Adorno, argued in Dialectic of Enlightenment, they were refugees from Nazi Germany. They pointed out that Nazism is a very rational, logical system. If you are inside of it, at least it appears rational and logical. And there's a logic to dictatorship and demagoguery and tyranny. So, in fact, part of our jobs, I think, as historians or whatever field you come from, is to think about how not only myth can be manipulated and therefore used to legitimate the slaughter of millions of people, but so can science, so can reason, so can logic, so can big history.
Sure, but what drives people to those extremes? It's to twist. In this country, for example, yes, not just this country, but it's clear as it says in the Bible that, or Jesus said apparently, that a rich man can get to heaven no more easily than a camel can get through the eye of a needle. They still twist it. Well, yeah, that might be the case, but as you're saying, logic is twisted, and people say, well, yeah, but Jesus will want us to have the money rather than the non-Christians. So you're right, but greed comes in there as a driving force. So I think it's always under the surface, some basic emotional needs and so forth. Thank you. I'll step aside.
All right, thanks. Stephen?
Yeah, if I could just make a point that Andre just made. Yeah, even Norbert Elias also made this point with the civilizing process. But also, need we forget, the Enlightenment was also the age of enlightened despot. baptism, like Catherine the Great and Frederick the Great, who was a direct model. Hitler considered him a great model. And Immanuel Kant even idolized Frederick the Great as the embodiment of the Enlightenment. But then we get to the French Revolution, which is based off Enlightenment ideals. Then you get the Reign of Terror, which is where we get the term terrorism from. So the problem is a lot of people have been noticing that the Enlightenment has had a mixed legacy. Yeah, it brought us a lot of these concepts of rationality and also our modern concepts of democracy, but it also brought us this concept that, hey, if you're holding up the progress of mankind, then you deserve to have your head cut off because this is for the greater good. And this again is where even the Nazis get this idea that, hey, if you systematically exterminate certain people, and not just the Jews, but even like people who are genetically deficient, then you're advancing the enlightenment, in quotation marks, of mankind. So this is kind of a very deep question that we need to kind of address in big history. And I do try to raise this in my talk and in my publications that, we do need to really critically examine some of these assumptions and presuppositions that we have about the world and even how big history and science work.
Excellent, Stephen. Keith?
The paper that I quote in there that I put the pointer to makes the case that humans have been genetically selected for war. Essentially, when there's a resource crisis problem, bad weather or whatever kind of thing that occurs, people are genetically programmed to go after and kill the neighbors because that was the appropriate way for your genes to survive. And it's a pretty dire analysis of the thing, but it does come up with some interesting things out of that. For example, there's actually a human group that is somewhat like bonobos, and it actually what I make in there is a case that you can explain the difference between chimpanzees who are intensely territorial and bonobos who are not by the genetic selection forces that acted on them. So you might find it amusing.
Excellent. Thank you. And Ian, I see that you've been making good comments in the chat, so we'll go ahead.
Yes, I thought I'd better say something. As I say, it's my first time with you guys, and I only heard of Big History about a month ago, so I'm that new. But I've been interacting with lots of different communities of people in the systems and in complexity, and we're all dealing with these existential crises that we must be able to do better in the world. And I think there are so many groups of people going back over so many of the ideas that you guys have mentioned. The overlap is almost total. Whichever I group to go to, we end up talking about the same things. I think there's a lesson in that. I mentioned in the comments there at least 3 or 4 sources where I instantly recognize. Great to hear you guys talking about that source. But in fact, there must be 30 different things I've made notes on here that you guys are talking about, things that I'm finding in other groups as well. Just one little example. I hadn't heard of you guys until about a month ago. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to a documentary with a bunch of scientists talking about taking biology into the geological timescale, and I thought, they're beginning to think about some of these things longer than just the history of human evolution. The development of the patterns of things, as somebody said. But they didn't mention big history. They didn't mention another thing which I haven't heard anybody here mention, which is the long now, which I think is also quite interesting. Not heard anybody mention it. So finally, I'd just like to say probably the biggest topic which I'm hearing, this whole thing about the conflict or the tension between the passions and reason, or between affect and rationality. I think this is actually really important. And I think I do seem to have a slightly different and maybe slightly contentious view here, so I'm going to say it anyway, even though it's my first time.
Yeah.
Which is, I think part of the problem is there's more than science. And science actually needs to be a bit more honest about that fact. So we are getting a lot of distrust of experts, people intuitively not trusting science. And it's because I think science is being a bit dishonest about some of the edges. So what I call it more than science. I actually have a very optimistic view about it, and I could say an awful lot more about the particular theories I bring to the idea of more than science, but this is probably not the place. I consider myself a postmodernist. So you don't, having studied postmodernism and rejected it, you don't pretend it never happened. You have to take the next step, I think. And I think that's where science in general is being a bit dishonest, shall I say. I'll leave it at that.
No, that's a very good point, and that's also one thing I agree with that. Yeah, science does not operate in a vacuum. I mean, there's all sorts of other discourses that we can develop on, and I even draw on theology in mind, not to make a theological argument, but just saying, hey, this is, and I even draw on the idea that even a lot of our ideas of science and politics came from theology. So it's like, let's have it part of the conversation. It doesn't mean we have to agree with like, what's the nature of God or Jesus and all that per se. I mean, that's your own view, but it's something we should at least be open to and open to inquiry. And it's possibly more of like a more classical view of science as what's a form of inquiry into the nature of reality rather than just simply what we have restricted it to right now. That's kind of part of the paradigm shift. And also a little bit like what we were talking about yesterday with AI, where now some of the older methods are now coming back in new ways because that's the best way to kind of make sure you're not committing like fraud with AI. And sorry if I took up
I have
anybody
a whole
else's.
thread. I have a whole thread in my work which I call "Nothing New Under the Sun." I actually find almost everything is coming around again, repackaged.
Yeah, if you could put it
lot.
in the chat or a link to
Yeah.
it, if it's online, I'd love to look at it and share my thoughts. Sorry if I took up anybody else's time.
No, I think that's very good. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thanks.
And if always remember Journal Big History if you want to submit something to that, write it up. And I also saw that a couple of you mentioned the ISSS. I was just wondering, what you think of any possibility of collaborating or giving talks between them. Any ideas on that, or later if you have ideas, please let us know.
Yeah, I certainly do. It was CK Town that invited me here, but again, it's because we found two overlaps and we should be having common conferences and things.
Yeah.
And part of that I am trying to bring, also to ISSS as well, because I just see such a lot of overlap and we're all wrestling with a lot of the same knotty ideas around the edges of what we understand in science.
Yeah, it'd be good to, kind of discuss with the wider audience, and we still have our small parts and specifics, but I think a lot of us have very common thoughts and concerns.
If it matters, it's 10 a.m.
ISS is what?
I said if it matters, it's 10 a.m.
Okay, very good. So the ISSS or ISSS,
International Society of System Sciences.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.